Well, good morning, friends. It's Pastor Eric here, and it's time for Pastor's Questions. We're in 2 Sam 7, verses 1 through 17. We discussed this yesterday in sermon. If you haven't read it, or if you haven't heard the sermon, these questions aren't going to make a ton of sense. So take the second to read the passage. Take 20 minutes to listen for the sermon, taking notes where you can, reversing and getting back to passages that or statements that you didn't quite understand. And here are some of the questions I've got. There's lots of ways to ask questions about this passage. And if you're here Monday night talking with our Pilgrim group on Monday night about the sermon, hi friends, and here we go. Number 1 from yesterday. The word house has many meanings, even in ancient times. Why might this be? And what are the 2 different meanings of house in our reading? What are those 2 different meanings of house in our reading? 2, how do our desires happen? We have them. Okay, now what? Do we worship them? Do we ignore them? How do our desires happen? What likely influenced David to build a house for his God? That desire. What likely influenced David's desire to build a house for his God? It's actually listed there for you in the passage, but we want to try to, defang the idea of desires, asking things too like, are our desires always wrong, or are our desires always right? Let's talk about desires or hopes and dreams. 3. God said, no, not now, to David's good desire. We saw that pretty clearly. How do you feel, though, when you bring good ideas to others but are told no or not now? This is part of what we want to take away from this. Describe a time you had a good idea, or at least mostly good, and it turned out really bad. Of course, you can have good ideas that turn out good too, and we thank God for those. But I want you to think about a time you had a good idea, or at least mostly good, and it turned out really bad. 4, I asserted that David was acting like Saul here. But how did that strike you emotionally? What did you feel about that? For some, it probably sounded harsh. Others, they may have heard a real leap there. Others may have tried to see my point but got sidetracked or lost in the weeds. But let's pretend that I'm correct just for discussion's sake. What about David's expressed desire might remind you of Saul? And why was it urgent for the Lord to intervene, and in fact did so through the prophet that night? 5, let's say you've got a big decision to make right now. What are the parts of deciding for a member of the Lord Jesus Christ's kingdom? How do we make decisions? And what does it mean if we ignore good process in decision making? I think that has some pretty big implications. Talk about that together with those who are there. What does it mean if we ignore good process in decision making? 6, how does the Lord redeem David's impulse to turn the Lord into a kept God? Almost like a pet. How does the Lord redeem David's impulse to turn the Lord into a kept God? Notice his response by asking David a question. Are you the one to build me a house? How does that response and the way the Lord brings good from bad help us in our day-to-day this week? I think it really does, in a concrete way at least one concrete way, help us in our day-to-day this week. The response the Lord gives and the fact that he's redeeming what is bad into something good is very powerful and encouraging to us. 7, if Pilgrim possesses royal dynastic roots, remember the series is called Pilgrim's Royal Roots, you have blue blood, that is. You've got blue blood by faith in Jesus Christ, the Son of David. Then what might stand in the way of her growing tall and useful in the Lord's garden? Think about it. This is the kind of stuff that I think about from time to time. If our royal roots are really vessels supplying us grace, then what new humility, sacrifice, or daily love to neighbors can Pilgrim attempt? What might require change for us all this season? And last, I want you to finish this thought from our passage, if you can. When we desire to do good for the Lord in some way, He desires to do what? When we desire to do good for the Lord in some way, he desires to do what? And I want you to show it from the passage. Well, thanks for your time. Those are our 8 questions for this week. And keep in touch. And where you've got other questions, please reach out and let me know, and I'd be glad to talk with you about those. Thanks.